I want to welcome everybody to Naturally Bay Area's Board Review Bootcamp. This is going to be an amazing session. It is packed with a group of rock stars from throughout the industry, and really glad to have everybody here. The objective of today is to be able to provide some tips, some resources, just some good advice to all of the community as we prepare for year-end reviews with our boards, right? And this has been a pretty eventful year. Let's just say that. A lot to be able to share, a lot to be able to tee up for your board. And I think everybody could use a few tips, a few just bits of advice on what are some of the blind sides and what are some of those things that you want to make sure you're emphasizing going in. So with that, I want to turn it over to Kevin Cleary of Big Rock. Kevin, take it away, and thanks again, everybody. By the way, you know what? Sorry, Kevin, that was inappropriate. Let me tee this up. We're going to go through 60 minutes up front. It is going to be led by Kevin and crew. On the back end of this session, there will be 30 minutes. We're going to have the opportunity for everybody to discuss, meet, mingle, and network, as well as get some of your questions out of the way there. So save some of those questions, write them down. Each one of the speakers is going to be hosting a breakout room, and so that'll be open to everyone there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. Kevin, you're on mute.
Yeah, we had to get that out of the way for the meeting today.
Exactly.
So good to meet everybody. I'm Kevin Cleary. I was with Cliff Bar for a long time as CEO, and now I'm running my own advisory company, Big Rock Growth Advisors. So really honored to be a part of this. So we've got, like Pete was saying, we got 7 presentations here today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch right in to the. So let me just go back to the slide here down here. Okay, so as Pete said, I mean, there's never been more madness in a year, right? It's just, as I work with my clients now, and I'm on a few boards, there's never been more turmoil or uncertainty as you look out at the horizon. And so one of the things I want to make sure, as I've been a part of a few board meetings, is that there's never been a more important time than really to be talking strategy with our boards. And that really needs to be the focus of this year-end meeting, is really about strategy. Now, of course, we need to cover off the financial metrics and some of the current execution wins and challenges that we always do in a board meeting, but we can't get stuck there in the conversation. We really need to make sure we're elevating it up with some of the key strategic issues that are happening with the business. And the couple of boards, or the few boards that I am on, we've been doing that over time. And it's been really beneficial that now we get in, we cover off some of the financial stuff quickly, and then we start getting into the strategy and meat of the discussion. And the other thing I recommend is just use the parking lot. If there is a question about execution or about financials, that we just use the parking lot, and we can always get back to people at a later point in time. We want to make sure we're staying focused. So this is the interesting thing about this year, is that I called it here the COVID performance curve, and where are you on that curve? And I'm working with clients right now that are all over the map on this. Some are crushing it. They happen to have a business that's at home use. They happen to be in channels that were still frequented or increased store traffic during that time. But the challenge there is that, there's a new financial and marketplace realities. I've had some people I'm working with and some people that I've talked to that have gone from single digits EBITs to mid-teen digit EBITs. And that all of a sudden puts you into a different realm of the type of business that you're running, and starts to give you more options for how you're going to run your business. So making sure that you're making that shift and you're talking consciously about how are we going to hold on to these new consumers if we've expanded, and how are we going to run a different kind of business? Because in a lot of ways, you're in a different reality that'll give you different options now than you had even a year ago. Some of the people I'm working with, it's a mixed bag. They had They had some of the business, you could be in some of the business in like the food service that has been just hammered, and you have some of the business that's been really strong. And what my recommendation here is that we focus on the strengths around, whether that's channel, product, consumer, whatever those strengths are, that we have a dedicated conversation. And then also we have an action plan on the weaknesses post-COVID, but we don't also just get caught up in this conversation talking about the weaknesses, because in the instances I've talked with people that are in this mixed bag, so to speak, area, the key thing has been around focusing on the strengths, because in many instances, by focusing on the strengths, we're starting to overcome some of those post-COVID challenge. I mean, some of the weaknesses we've had in some of like the food service channel. And then, the tough times. And this is, a lot of companies, particularly in that on-the-go eating, and what I recommend here is we've got to have really short-term planning and a plan for the next 6 months to year, through 2021, but also making sure we're keeping our eye on the horizon, because we are going to get by this. We will get on the other side. And the key question I ask everybody to talk about in this section is just, have the category fundamentals changed? Have there been things that have happened during COVID that have fundamentally changed what has happened in your category, in your space? And then obviously any key strategic adjustments or pivots that you've made or need to make over the coming period of time. And the other thing that I'm just recommending is a key element is that, we spend time with straight talk with the board. And what I mean by that is talk about, especially now, what we know, right? What we think we know and what we don't know. And as I look at a lot of people as they're going into 2021 planning right now, there's a lot in that don't know area. And let's not try to foster that we do know or think that we have to know. Let's just be very open on, here are the things that we know, we think we know, and we don't know. And I think, that's where we're going to need to be also leaning on the board to help us out. And then the last thing that I always recommend is be really clear from the board about what you need from them during the meeting. And I would even have a slide up front just saying, hey, here's what I'm going to need. We're going to talk strategy today. We're going to talk about it in these areas. Here's what I need from you. And that should actually go out in a communication prior to sending anything out. But in any instance, what I recommend is keeping your view on the horizon, even if you're in the tough times bucket, because we will get on the other side of this, and a continued focus on your big rock. And I'll talk about that now in a minute. So, one of the things that, it goes with the name of my company, Big Rock, but, in these times, I did this at Cliff during some pretty challenging times, was we came back and focused on what our company's big rock is. And that is, what is the brand or product that is your rock, that the things that you actually have probably built your company around, or that is still your rock that we need to focus on, because it's our big opportunity to continue to grow in that part of our business. And the question becomes, how do you grow that product? And the other thing that I say in times like this, as we're going through, is it is time to simplify and streamline. This isn't the time to pack a bunch of stuff on top of ourselves, but it is about simplifying and streamlining and making sure we're being very clear about what is the product that is our anchor, that is our big rock that we need to continue to focus on to grow. Then what I'm talking to people about is, what is the strategic intent? And that is like being very clear about what's the one thing you need to accomplish over the next 3 years to meet your objectives. It could be about increasing household penetration. It could be about holding on to the household penetration that we just gained over the past 6 to 9 months. Could be buying rate, could be share, and you can see the other ones there. So is also about being very clear with your board and your company about what is it that we need to go do to make sure we can hit our objectives. And then obviously building out your go-to-market strategies, or if you have them today, reviewing them. And when I talk about this, I like to talk about it in 2 ways. One, that's growth strategies, which are external facing, and the other side of those internal enabling strategies that really help you deliver what those growth strategies are. So if it's about enabling strategy, could be something about, wow, I've got to improve my gross margin, or I need to get my on-time in fill up so I'm not paying a bunch of penalties, or I need to get my fill rate up, or figure out some supply chain challenges that'll help me get there. And then lastly, what I encourage everybody across all three of those elements is nail the basics. And that's about understanding, where your products are sold, you have the right products on the shelf, what's your pricing, strategies, other opportunities, promotion and placement, and having discussions around that with your board about what some of those short-term opportunities are. And as I've met with most companies, there is, at least by optimizing our go-to-market, our 4 Ps or controllables, I've always seen at least 10% plus growth in just getting better in our execution and staying focused in that area. So with that, and at my 8 minutes, I'm going to pass this on to Brad Barnhorn. So Brad, if you can please take over.
Brad, we got you on mute.
Super. Thanks, Pete. Hello, everybody. I guess we should be the naturally Applewood smoked Bay Area currently, given the air conditions occasionally at times. So great job, Kevin. I think I couldn't said a lot of that stuff better than you did, just laying out just real key fundamentals. I'm going to retailer a bit, Pete and Kevin, what I'm going to talk about. I think, within what I put together, there's a little more on a board in general versus specifically on year-end review. So I'm going to move quickly through the first slide, which is relevant in as much as having a good board, informing it the right way and using it the right way allows all the things Kevin is talking about to be really effective. And so, when you build a board, and a lot of people on the call here probably are either thinking about or may have just begun, you really want to make sure you're architecting, just like any part of the organization, with an eye to being effective. And, what are the great reasons of a board? People ask often to me. First of all, is something that Kevin just really pointed to there, which is how do you really establish a culture where management has a group of people that they can really be accountable to, not in a hierarchical sort of dominating way, but in a way that really allows them to think through the business thoroughly and a group they can really stress test the thinking against. And that's a core reason. The context of that they can provide as a board to a CEO, someone like Kevin or myself may work with 7, 8, 9 companies, or VMG, work with a portfolio. We have the ability to look across companies and really see patterns emerging or see things happening in certain channels, plus to bring that back to a certain company. And that ability to provide context on the business, to coach the CEO how to navigate certain situations, and provide that sort of more intellectual property piece of consulting and general advice. That's an incredible reason to have a board. Filling critical know-how and experience gaps. That's one where I will just have the context that oftentimes in building a board, you want to figure out where's your expertise, whether it's right on the board or whether it's better as an advisor or a full-time employee. And normally I tell companies, bring board members in who can think holistically about the whole business. If they just know certain functionality, it means they can't participate in a lot of the important board discussions involved with the overall company's perspective. So, try to bring in people who maybe a little lean toward a sales experience or marketing, but have dealt with all parts of building a business generally. It's for smaller growth stage companies. As you get really large, you can start bringing in functional board seats a little more effectively, but earlier on, really a broad holistic view of a business. Other great reasons, so much early stage, it's not just about what you choose to do. It's also what you choose not to do. So avoiding the fatal mistakes of a pricing structure which won't be sustainable long term, or deciding how to bring in a certain amount of capital or type of capital that could be very restrictive on future capital. So huge range of things that a board can help you avoid in that regard. You see one of the other things on this sheet in terms of great reasons. Pragmatic reasons. I don't think they're the best reasons, but they're not bad. People do like seeing certain board members on boards, gives them a sense of validation of the company as they look at the company as an investor or as an employee. Even I get calls from employees who want to talk to me as a board member occasionally. It's corporate requirement is you start getting venture capital in, you will start seeing a board being required. And also from a CEO side, it's really great to have a team of people around you who you are sort of sharing the leadership of the business with to some degree. And from a legal perspective, a board helps diffuse a little bit of liability as well. Bad reasons I have listed here: window dressing. Don't just bring someone on who's not relevant to your business space because they have a big name or You know, if they were a senior leader at General Electric and you're building a food business, probably not the right person. So be careful for window dressing or just to say, hey, I got this person on my board when they won't really add value. So more important for this conversation, how to manage your board to be effective. And some of these themes will really tie off on Kevin. The first one is more a statement about over time, meaning consistently presenting to your board in certain formats and templates. So you build a board language, how to look at the business is critical. If every time you come into your board meeting, you have a different way of looking at financials or a whole different way of presenting them, and you have a different way of looking at your key customer performance, the board has to relearn every time that thinking. So really develop a relatively templated board deck, which within that you can explore different thinking in terms of strategy or sensitivity analysis on certain things, et cetera. But try to get to a pretty consistent way so the board gets used to thinking about things within a certain structure that allows you then to have the big important conversations. Transparency. This goes back to Kevin's point. The board is there to support you. And a lot of CEOs continue to treat their board as potential investors, which is a tricky time sometimes. Sometimes your investor may be looking to only a follow-on round of capital. But you want to be careful to be very, very open and transparent to get support from them. I recognize Permacula, once again, sometimes they may be future capital providers as well in another round. So can be a little tension there, but transparency is crucial. Don't use your board for your validation of your own brilliance. Once again, you're not there to win them over. You're not there to have them go, great job. You're there to present a realistic picture of the business and give them information sets and context for the business to help them engage discussions on key issues. The schedule and pacing, let's skip that right now. Next point you heard previously, first slide to me in every deck is, here are the 3 things I want out of my board in this meeting today. Really thinking through in advance. I want to walk out this meeting after 3 hours with a clear idea or channel strategy, a better idea on how to build my senior team out, et cetera. Whatever those 3 things are, do the work up front. Give them, it's almost like wine tasting, right? Tell your board what's coming. Here's what I want you to really engage in, and then make sure you give them information in the deck pre-read so they can engage that from an informed perspective, those key issues. Next one, dashboard commentary on issue identification. Once again, get materials to the board in advance. There's nothing hard as a board member to get a 100-page board deck, which is too long in the first place, but to get that at midnight before a 9 a.m. meeting. It just doesn't set up the right setting for the board to do its work in advance to really get up to speed on where things are. Always end of a board meeting, step back, recap, and establish next steps you're going to report back against. Some of those might be your 30, 60-day, 90-day goals leading to the next board meeting. Some might just be some conclusions you reached and say, hey, walk out of this board meeting, here's where I think we're going to dig deeper to look at this certain strategic direction or not. But really use the board meeting end to really step back, recap, and set next steps that really begin the process for the next board meeting 3 months later. So those are the key elements there. Last slide. What do I want to focus on here? I would just say the 4th point under common areas of tension, which is the toughest time for some CEOs and boards is when things aren't going right. And that is oftentimes when the board can be the most valuable. So when you feel yourself having a sense that you're positioning something or trying to avoid a topic, or you feel your team has delivered a certain outcome, be upfront. Stay up front. We have not hit this target. We are not performing how we want to in this area. And here are our recommended corrective actions, or here are potential corrective actions you want to look at. Really be open. Being in a board meeting and trying to guess what a CEO doesn't want to talk about is not really effective. So once again, be open, be prepared, and don't shy away from the tough questions.
Hey, Brad, nice job. Thank you. That provided a lot of clarity and was extremely helpful and provides a lot of context. So now we're going to take a step and do some functional updates to give you some ideas on how you, as you start to work through that board meeting, whether it's marketing, people, ops, finance, sales, we've got some experts, and we're going to kick that off, I think, with marketing with Jessica. So Jessica, if you can please pull up your screen and have a way at it.
Yeah, let me pull it up. Cool. All right, can everyone see it? Thumbs up. All right, Great. So I am the VP of Brand and Marketing at Olly. At Olly, that is the brand function, insights, marketing communications, and e-commerce. And I've been there since almost the beginning, so 2016. It's been a really fun ride. And I'm super excited to be here and talk to you guys a little bit about this. So in general, I think the great news is, Brad and Kevin and I are on the same page. So I think in building a strong foundation for a board meeting, two of the most important things that you can really do are focus on driving the conversation and being transparent. And I'll go into that a little bit more, kind of what that means for marketing. And then once you have kind of those key components that create a really solid foundation for a great meeting, then you can really share your vision going forward effectively. So in terms of, driving the meeting, two things I'll say that I think are really helpful. One, when you focus on the results, what we have at Olly, we call them OKRs, objectives and key results. If you haven't heard of those before, I really encourage you to read the book, Measure What Matters. It's really helpful in making sure you're laser focused on the right things for the conversations. And then the second piece I'll note is, your board is there to help you. And if you're not telling them what you need help on, you're going to end up having peripheral conversations about things you don't want to get into. So, case in point, right? If you want to double your marketing spend next year because you have really increased household penetration, you need to hold on to those consumers, have that conversation. Make sure you call that out, because otherwise you're going to end up having a conversation about influencers or packaging or a new item you launched, and you don't want to go there. You want to spend your time in the right way. And then the other thing I'll say is, we all have Zoom fatigue. Like, we're on calls all the time. We're sitting in our apartments, our homes. So how can you bring that spirit of collaboration to meetings? So whether that's sending, products, like sharing new creative, sending press kits, anything you can do to foster that in-person relationship, I think makes for a really great meeting. And then in terms of, being transparent, 2020 didn't go as planned for anyone. So I think it's less about where you netted out versus where you thought you would be, and more about the why and the so what and how you're going to integrate that into your 2021 operating plan going forward. And I think a great way to really do that is to show how you've already evolved over the course of this year. So what insights have you identified, and how have you evolved those in the back half? So, something that happened to us at Olly, we had this really awesome out-of-home campaign. It was like energy ads, like on commuting lines, and it was like this perfect consumer aperture. Well, all of a sudden, commuting died. So how did we take that insight and translate it to something similar? So basically, we were thinking through how can we capture that, working professional, and instead we basically leveraged breakthrough creative on WeTransfer, which is a data transfer platform that a lot of people use to send files. So it's basically helping people understand how, even though the environment has changed, the insight remains the same, and showing how you can execute against that going forward. And so now, once you have kind of, this is what happened in 2020, how can you really set 2021 up for success? And I think, you don't want to lose sight of playing the long game. Like, you can definitely become, reactionary in this current environment. There's a lot of unknown. It's very difficult. We're all trying to navigate it together. Every day seems to evolve. So I think one of the most important things is really investing in your culture internally, and then your purpose also externally. Like, those are things that, you can really rally behind, and I think help a brand have staying power. And those things also help you build consumer advocacy. And I think as you're scaling a brand, you really want those super fans behind you, because that word of mouth is invaluable. And it's something, again, that helps with the longevity of the brand. And then the third point really is, it sounds like marketing 101, and it is, but like, we need to have integrated plans. And I think now more so than ever, you want to really partner closely with your sales counterparts. And also, if you have a creative function, creative, because you need those integrated go-to-market plans that allow you to have a cohesive look and feel from your packaging to your sell sheets to your website, but also enable you to shift funds really fluidly. So making sure that that team is hyper aligned going into the planning session. And then I think even though you have, right, a long-term vision, you also want to build your plan to be flexible. So how can you, adjust to what could potentially accelerate in the future? So I know you guys have probably heard a ton about Omni. delivery, services for grocery, that's really accelerated. Like, how can you think through how you can build in those elements to your plan going forward? And then if there are things that are so critical to your plan, like let's say sampling, for instance, I would say have a plan B or even a plan C. Because you need to figure out if in-store sampling dies, and that's really important, what is a different way that you can get your product in consumers' hands in a challenging environment? And then last, but not least, I think that it's so important that your board is there to provide guidance and strategic input, but you have to trust your gut. No one knows your brand and your consumer better than you do, and you should never lose sight of that. So I think whenever you're getting feedback, really probe to understand where it's coming from. Because I think once you have a deeper understanding of that, you can really take that feedback and internalize it, but then put forth a plan of recommendation that you really believe in. So, I mean, that's kind of how I would approach really those year-end meetings. I think, again, it's reflecting on like, this is what happened in 2020, acknowledging it, learning from it, and then setting up a plan that has long-term success in mind, but flexibility in the short term. Cool.
Jessica, that's really insightful and very helpful. And I like the way you dimensionalized out on how to leverage the board and also how to reflect on what you're doing. So as the marketing lead, and that's awesome. Thank you. Moving on from there, we're going to talk about people, practices, and structure. And Cassie's going to take it away.
Hey, good to see you guys all. Some of my favorite folks on this call, which is a lot of fun. You probably don't want to see my email or my system. Let's get the right system up. Okay, cool. How do I turn this into presentation mode? Let's do that. There we go. Okay. Awesome. For those of you guys that don't know me, I'm Cassie Nielsen. I'm the head of talent over at VMG Partners. This is something my compliance team says I have to say. These are my opinions, not necessarily that of VMG Partners. This is what happens when you're regulated by the SEC. You got to say these things. So there's that caveat. I really hate this presentation mode. We're just going to do this. Okay. So questions you should be prepared to answer. I'm often guilty of getting pretty tactical, and we're going to do just that. So first and foremost, do you have the right team? And I think there's a few ways to think about this. First, I think it's important. I am no expert at building startups. However, I do have a lot of strong opinions on how to scale teams as the company grows. So what I've shared with you is a lot of information around where are you going so that you can build the team today that will support, your growing business over the future. And there's been some insights I've learned since being at VMG around how to do that. Pete warned me I should not swear as much as I normally do because this is being recorded. So GSD means get stuff done. And that's how I normally say it. So basically, like when you're a small, less than $10 million company, you're surrounding yourself with folks that are just like loyal by friendship, but sometimes by family, by vision. Like that is what, they're incentivized, and they're going to do whatever it takes to build this company and grow it. And it sometimes means the organization is small, maybe 10 to 15 people. You have zero, if maybe just a few folks that are over 100K in base. And I'll come back to the compensation ratio. I think that's an important insight. Once you kind of get to that scale, you've proved your concept, but now you're really growing in distribution, e-commerce, whatever it might be. This is where I think it's important that you're now surrounding yourself by folks that are player coaches. They're still in the weeds, but they're also able to help you set the strategy. A scary part about this inflection point is you might not have the same people in your organization from the beginning that you have at this point. And that's healthy. It doesn't mean you should be relentless or ruthless in changing over your organization, but it's very natural that starts to happen at this stage. And you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about your compensation strategy at this point. If you've raised dollars, you might have folks that say, hey, I'm not at market and other companies are trying to attract me. You have to be a little bit more thoughtful about getting to that, thoughtful compensation band. But it's important that your team is still small. I would say probably less than 30 employees. And you probably now at this point have a few folks which are over 100K. Now, 100 million might feel far away. and it may take a while to get there. Again, think, it is not wrong to think about what your business would look like at that stage and back into it so that you are thoughtful about your equity and allocating enough so that you can really start attracting those strategic veterans that have been there and done that and probably have some of that exit experience and deep functional experience. Just let me come back to the compensation as a percent of sales ratio. This is one that I've gotten more conviction on over the years. So when you're small, it's really hard to be as efficient with the number of employees as you'd like to be. But once you start hitting scale, you really want that ratio to be under 15%. And we've had some companies that have exited over, they're over 100 million in net revenue, and that ratio, they're getting it down to like 6-7%. On the flip side, I don't want to give you so much warning that you're now underbuilding your team. So, if you're at 4 or 5%, that could be problematic. I'm going to start moving through these a little bit quickly because you guys have this as a takeaway, but I've shared a sample org structure, and I've even gotten pretty granular with some comps that I might suggest and some of the experience that we have found that makes these folks particularly strong. Okay, so the next question, do I have the right team? I feel it has always been, but it is increasingly important in this day and age to ask yourself, is your team diverse? And there's a lot of ways to define that. I think it's important not to ignore the fact that diversity does mean gender and it does mean race and ethnicity. So yes, it's perspectives and economic background, but don't let that be the reason you describe your team as diverse in lieu of these important demographics as well. So what I've shared with you here is an example of something that VMG is starting to implement. And we're basically providing our companies a report which shows them how does your organization compare against like organizations, which are our other portfolio companies. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I think it's a good example to share around metrics that perhaps you should start tracking for yourself. So here, imagine we're talking about company X. They're 94 employees. Here's the breakdown of gender. We're looking at, how much is women compensation as a percent of male. You can see there's a gender gap here that we want to try to address at some point. We've got good gender breakdown of our senior leadership team. We're looking at ethnicity and observing where the compensation gaps exist. And then probably more importantly, we're showing how they compare against peer companies. So company X is number 2 when it comes to gender diversity, but they're number 13 out of 20 when it comes to ethnic diversity. The point here is when you're small, it's much easier to control these things and be intentional about the composition of your team than when you're large and try to correct changes. So I really want to drive home how important that is. A few other slides on here that point to that. Next, is your team happy? And if you're getting to the stage where you have a big enough organization, I would suggest implementing some type of tool to properly measure this. So here's a snapshot with some fake data from Lattice around asking an annual engagement survey a bunch of questions that help you measure if your people are feeling engaged, if they feel like they belong, if they're having fun, if they're looking elsewhere. And I've broken it down here by gender, which I think is important. Look, in this fake data, women don't feel like their performance is being evaluated as fairly as men in the organization. Those are really important insights. But you can also break it down by team and other demographics. Are they being paid fairly? So it's never too early to build in compensation bands. I've put in a fake scenario here of a business that would sell at 300 million and some examples. And this is probably really thoughtful bandings here and very realistic to what the market is dictating for compensation. And then equity. The most important thing to me is, do they understand how equity works? I'm not saying that you should create an equity incentive pool right away, but you should be mindful that at the right time, it is a really powerful retention tactic. And it's something I fundamentally believe in, that you want to try to equitize as much as possible through the organization. So some questions to think about if you're at that inflection point. I'm running out of time. I'm going to go through the rest of it really quick.
Thanks, Cassie. Thank you.
Yeah. Benefits is an important part of compensation. So I stole this from one of our portfolio company slides, a really interesting way to think about differentiated benefit programs. And then finally, I'll leave you with like questions you should be prepared to ask. Do you have the right board? And you know, I think it's important to think about that independent board member and the power of that role. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased because the other hat that I wear is Women on Boards project. So this is something I like to harp on quite a bit, but I'll end it there. Wow, that time goes really fast.
Cassie, great job. You had a lot of value in there. And these decks are going out to everybody, right, Pete? Everybody's going to get a packet. So there was so much there, Cassie. It's awesome. I mean, I love the right team, love the diversity play and thinking about equity and really great stuff. So thank you for that. And that'll be one of those we'll have to dive into even more. So on operations and supply chain, we have Brandon. Brandon, let you take it away, sir.
All right, sounds good. I hope everybody can see this. So you're going to see a common thread, I think, amongst all of us that obviously setting up your board the right way the first time obviously is going to be vital to your ability to grow, your ability to pivot and make changes quickly in the instance that there's some oh shits, sorry, Pete. But in this, the operational aspect of this is fundamental to be able to continue to do your sales and marketing strategy, to be able to really prove to your board members that your operations in general are in it for the long haul. And above and beyond all that is that the hope is that you fill it with veterans that can help you with those times where you really do come against where you feel like you've hit a brick wall, where you feel like you're not able to solve for the problem yourself. And so something that was shared, and I won't go too deep into it right now, but for your supply chain and your manufacturers, it's a right the first time. And that's provided in what you'll be given after this. But it really is a scorecard of not only your manufacturing assets or your manufacturing partners, and whether you're self-manufacturing or you've outsourced to do a co-packer, you should be grading them consistently on their ability to produce product, to produce the quantity that was ordered, and to produce it at the cost that was agreed to. And so right the first time, number of holds, their ability to ship on time and in full, those are all critical factors that you want to bring in to those conversations. And if they're not happening, those are conversations that you want to have with your board, so that as you mature and as your business grows, if a pivot is necessary away from a manufacturing asset, whether it's internal or external, you can ping those resources. And hopefully you have people on your board that, as you've built it out, can help answer those questions quickly. Another thing that we see a lot of, that bad news early. If you feel like you're in a recall scenario, a market withdrawal, you feel like something catastrophic is about to happen with one of the SKUs, bring that to the board, bad news early, so that they can help you navigate what that is. You wouldn't believe the number of boards that we deal with or brands that try and keep it away from the board as long as possible. That if you've built your board right, there's resources to bear that can come in and help you understand what it is that needs to happen. SKU velocities and rationalization. Realistically, the reason you bring up rationalization is, does this SKU belong here? And should we continue to produce it? Because if you continue to produce a low performing SKU and it's costing you a lot of money on the back end, especially when it comes to manufacturing it, because you're paying for extra cleans or you're paying for allergen changeovers that are not necessary if you were to get rid of it, and it actually makes the rest of the business perform better, don't be afraid to have those conversations and have that data to share with the board so they can help you understand whether that rationalization needs to occur. And they should be coming in without a biased view, to Brad's point and to other people's point earlier, is that they're taking an unbiased view. They're looking at it as the overall performance of the business And is it important to maintain a dog SKU that really isn't doing anything for you in the long run? Raw material vendor reviews, this has become critically important, especially in the era of COVID. The brands that got bit the hardest are the ones that had no secondary suppliers teed up. They hadn't even looked at a secondary supplier for rare ingredients. They hadn't contracted for rare ingredients. And when the pandemic really hit, the first thing we saw was raw material contracts go through the roof, and they were going through to people that, to the larger CPG brands, the General Mills, the Kellogg's, the people that could, theoretically, they have the more horsepower than you will. And if you hadn't contracted prior to, you were stuck in secondary spot buy markets. And so you definitely want to be doing those raw material reviews with your team. Use the data from right the first time and things like that. But also utilize the people that have been there before. That's why they're there. Where would you go for a secondary supplier for a unique ingredient? And what does general contracting for raw material look like? It's okay to ping those resources and to ask them fundamentally how you should proceed forward. Tying into the last point, any at-risk suppliers in your pipeline, whether it's brokers are generally filled last. So you have to be careful how many brokers versus how many straight raw material providers you have. And so make sure you're doing your homework when it comes to your secondary supply chain. You also want to set up something that is too many, I see it as a surprise too many times in operational reviews, is major changes in internal management or even in manufacturing assets. All of a sudden somebody just doesn't appear in either in the deck or on a call. You really want to make sure that your board is aware that there's been some major infrastructure changes as it relates to your brand, because either they can help step in and fill the gap, or they can help identify people out in the world that may be able to help you fill that position quicker. And so you want to have the change management programs in place so that they can understand that. Any new or altered raw material or manufacturing agreement. And generally for the board, you want to keep it to abstracts. I mean, what was critical for them to know, what materially changed or didn't change. So they want to know that. Again, you want to know that because if it ties into raw material costing, if it ties into manufacturing cost, those are all things that factor and affect everything else in the business. Whether your ability to compensate somebody appropriately, or launch a BOGO program, or to bring on a new VP. Those are things that materially affect everything that goes on in the business. And then finally, what are you doing for margin improvement and cost optimization? Now that's something that ties into your raw material reviews and to your manufacturing, but what specifically have you done outside of simply putting metrics against what's already in your supply chain? What else are you doing for cost optimization and for margin improvement? And because ultimately at the end of the day, you want to be able to breeze through these things, because you want to get into the meat and potatoes of how to grow and scale the business and pinging the resources for that. But too often we see that, especially on the operations side, people slink back and they hold their cards close to the vest when it comes to bad news. Understand, you put this board in place for a reason. Bad news early, and you don't get what you don't ask for. So you got to make sure you're utilizing the tools that you've put in place to help you grow and scale your business, because ultimately it's the best way for you to proceed forward and to be really a high level, high horsepower business.
Hey, Brandon, that was excellent. Thank you. A couple things come to mind is it's not, it was a great deck because it's also about what you're bringing to the board, but it's also about building resiliency into your supply chain, right? And that's through the multiple single source and everything else that you're taught, cost and everything, in getting the right talent in there to run it. So really well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, let's turn to finance and Alyssa.
Hi, everybody. Give me 1 second to bring up the deck. And I will be joined by Ryan from BPM as well. So you'll hear him come in for part of this. Here we go. Just to give you guys a little bit of background. So one of the things that we do at Propeller in our part-time CFO role is we actually help a lot of our founders prepare for board meetings, and we'll attend a lot of them as well and present the financial section. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. We're able to really see kind of across a lot of our clients what works well and what doesn't. So I wanted to talk first about kind of the goals of the financial review. You heard Kevin talk at the beginning of a lot of times in his board meetings, they try to get through the finances really quickly because what you want to be talking about is strategy. And I think that that's exactly right. I think financials, if done well, can actually lead into that conversation. So really the goals of like going through your financials are to translate that strategy and all these other things that we've talked about into measures and numbers. It gives your board visibility into what the company performance is. And it also helps facilitate alignment of your future goals. So again, it's not just talking about the numbers on the sheet. It's talking about, you know, it's a numeric representation of what that means for what you're thinking about for future resourcing, for strategic initiatives that may require investment and payoff later. It's also an opportunity to highlight strengths and opportunities of the business or else current challenges. I've been in board meetings where even though the founder is saying that like something is a big area of opportunity, until we really look at the financials, that's kind of an aha moment for the board to say, okay, we get this, we need to talk about this. The other big thing that your financials can lead to is really helping determine the timing and size of your next funding round and what that financing looks like. So when are you going to run out of cash and what financing do you need to be discussing? Is that debt? Is that equity? Is it a mix? It can also really give a lot of support to your pitch. So you can kind of take a look at what story are you able to really tell in terms of what are your differentiators and where are your strengths and opportunities. This is a checklist that you want to have. So at every single board meeting, whether it's a year-end board meeting or a quarterly review, you want to have your P&L, and that's an actual versus your plan. You typically want to look at this for a year-to-date view, as well as the most recent prior period since you've had your last board meeting. So if you're doing monthly board meetings, it might be a monthly look. If you're doing quarterly board meetings, it will be a quarterly look. You also want to show your year-to-go forecast. And you want to show this as it relates to your full year. So full year of what your expectations are, what that looks like versus your prior year, and how does that compare against what your original plan was. And then the most important part is how does that all translate into your cash burn for historicals and what your runway looks like for the future. If you're running low on cash, so typically where we would say low is if your cash out date is within 8 to 12 weeks, you want to actually show a cash plan kind of on a weekly basis. If your cash out date is more than 2 to 3 months out, it's fine to show kind of what your cash runway is by month, so long as you're able to kind of tell your board, this is when we think that we're going to run out, and this is the point that we need to start talking early about what our funding options are. For 2021 planning, going to the end of this year, you'll want to present what you think next year will look like, so what that base plan is. And that's really going to be kind of your best guess of what you think next year will look like. We always suggest scenario analyses. So that is taking that base plan and saying, you know, if I lost a big account, what would that look like? If I were to gain a big account, what would that look like? In a COVID scenario, it is even more important to do this because there's a lot of uncertainty around next year. So really kind of thinking about those things that would anyway be drivers, ups and downs of your business, and thinking about them in context of what could happen next year. So if there were shutdowns, if there were further supply chain issues, what does that look like? Depending on your business, you may actually want to present a few different plans of a worst case scenario and a best case scenario. At the very least, you should understand what the cash impacts are of those different scenarios and be able to speak to the board of, this big driver, this big thing on the horizon that could happen. This could actually lead to a cash runway that is shorter than what we're presenting as part of our base plan. And so do we need to start thinking about early what we would need to do to be able to be ready for that? These are kind of the minimum of what you would need. There's a number of KPIs that you would want to potentially present as well, and that's going to be more specific to your business and what the drivers of your business are. So I'm not going to go through all these, but here's a number of them that we would typically want to be looking at least in the background for a CPG business, as well as if you are playing in the D2C space. As it relates to which ones of these you show on your board slides, again, that's going to be a little bit dependent on your business. At the very least, you should know all of these off the top of your head. So all of these you should have in your back pocket, because these are all key drivers that are going to make a difference on what your performance could be. And then I'm not going to go through these in detail either, but these are on slides that will be sent out on the deck afterward. So this is just an example of some board financials. This is a scenario where it's actual through Q3 and then a forecast for Q4. So similar to what I was talking about, you have a comparison versus the prior year. You can also do a comparison versus plan. In this case, we chose to show some key balance sheet metrics rather than some actual balance sheet data, which is kind of really the drivers of our working capital, which is going to give you a lot of insight into where your cash is going. And then kind of making sure that we're highlighting what our cash flow is both historically and what we expect it to be in the future. And then similarly, this is a year-to-date version of it. You guys can go through this on your own time in more detail, or I'm happy to answer any questions about this over email or in breakouts afterward. But gives you an idea of kind of one format that you could use to set up your board slides. I would say one of the big things is every board is a little bit different. So take in feedback from your board. Make sure that you're giving them the information that they find the most valuable.
Hey, Alyssa, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So Ryan's going to talk real quick about there's a few things that are specific to 2021 that you may want to be thinking about from an accounting perspective. And so he's going to jump through these, and then I have one more slide to end it with.
Great. Thanks, Alyssa, and I'll keep this quick. I appreciate everybody who's come before. So you kind of have a revenue story and you've got an operations plan. I'm not going to go into the detail of all the different accounting things that you could do at year end, but these are kind of just two things to keep in mind that are kind of unique to 2020. So if you got a PPP loan, congratulations. It was a very difficult process to go through and get that application. You have options how to account for it. So you can either account for it as debt, and then basically when it's formally forgiven, you can recognize the income next year. Or you can account for it as a government grant, and if all the conditions were met, you can recognize it this year. So accounting is usually kind of all about rules, and in this case, you have options. So I just wanted to point that out. And then I know it's been a tough year for a lot of companies, and a lot of companies are using this time to kind of invest in themselves and their products. There's R&D credits out there, and they changed the rules recently for small companies, where you can basically monetize those R&D credits even if you're not profitable yet. So if you're still investing in your business and you're pre-profit, if you're less than 5 years old and less than 5 million of revenue, you can take those credits, which are just on your normal tax return, and you can apply them to your payroll taxes, which everybody pays. So everybody's got employees. Most of the companies in this ecosystem have R&D expenses. So it's just an opportunity that's out there to take advantage of and also mention to your board. So I appreciate your time, and Alyssa and I are both available later for questions.
And just real quick, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think a lot of these themes you guys have heard about along the way, but just a few best practices as it relates to your financials. So the first one is making sure that all your numbers are correct. You do not want to spend time in your board meeting kind of diving into why does something look off. You guys probably all watch Shark Tank, and one of the big themes there is always know your numbers and key metrics. You should have those in your back pocket. It's going to give you credibility for your business. Know your industry reporting standards and be consistent. So are you doing trade spend correctly? Do you have what should be above the line, above the line? That's going to give you also a lot of credibility with your board in terms of that you know the space that you're in. You've heard this a lot along the way. Do not surprise your board with bad news. If you need to back channel ahead of time, I would suggest doing that. At the very least, sending out your financials before the board meeting, highlighting anything that is a negative surprise and saying that we're going to address it and this is what you're going to talk about. And then lastly is walking through your financials like a story. So it's keeping that forest versus the trees, being strategic about it. You don't want to spend a lot of time feeling like you're doing a financial report card. It should really be facilitating these strategic discussions.
Thank you, Alyssa. That was really comprehensive. And I think when everybody gets the decks, a lot to work from. And I really want to just highlight the point of storytelling through your financials. I think that is just a critical component that I think too often is overlooked. So thank you for that. And batting cleanup today is Elliot to talk to us about sales. And Elliot, if you could please keep this to 8 minutes so we can have a little bit of time for our breakouts, would be appreciated.
Yeah, sorry, no way, Kevin, can't do it. No. The good thing about going last is that I have less to say because everybody has already said it, and so I'm pretty confident I can do better than 8 minutes. Elliot Began with TIG, and just perspective-wise, as I approach how to kind of share this, I'm doing it from 3 different perspectives. As a board member, as somebody that helps founders form and manage and prepare for board meetings, and in a former life as somebody that used to have to stand and present to boards quite often. And specifically, Pete asked that I address sales. So this is typically where the bullshit meter red lines in a board meeting. So we'll cover that a bit. And I'll skip this KPI dashboard because really Alyssa did this. I really want to talk about how you engage with your board. And I think this goes beyond sales. And it was said at the onset, the key here is that a board serves you. It's there to help and to engage the collective wisdom of the board to really help the business take the next big step is key. So I organize a board presentation or conversation around sales around basically 3 buckets: brag, gripe, and ask, right? Which I learned from my adult children now. So if you're going to brag, listen, if you're in sales, it's hard and battles are hard won. So celebrate them and celebrate them with your board quickly. So that would be things like new business, successful promotions, growth or milestones achieved, etc. And then you want to get into gripe. You want to let them know that it is a struggle. You want to share, to give them a well-rounded view of what could be obstacles or challenges. And that could be challenges with team or lack of team. It could be business losses, a key account lost, a SKU rationalized out, or milestone shortfalls, and the headwinds or obstacles that you see in the achievement of future objectives or goals. And both of these, both the brag and the gripe, should be the shortest 2 components of your conversation. Where the real opportunity is, and if a board is established well and really is serving its business and serving its founder, its CEO, and its entire team, then they're there to help, and they've amassed a lot of experience and have a lot of skill and have a lot of insight. And a miss so often is that we don't ask our board members for help. We wind up courting them and trying to impress them and just trying to do that dance. And instead of engaging them in a meaningful, strategic 2-way conversation in which they can actually help move things forward. So before you go into any board meeting, and whether this is sales or in any functional area, know what your asks are. As a team together, talk about what those asks are. And those asks could include, doors that can be open, barriers that could be knocked down, connections that can be made, best practices and lessons learned. Listen, every mistake you've made and every mistake you're going to make, more than likely someone on that board has been involved in a similar mistake or has learned a similar lesson, and they can help reduce that learning curve and maybe reduce even some of the scrapes and bruises that you get along the way. So that's really it. I mean, it's no different in any functional area, in my opinion. And the key is, the benefit is this interactivity, this conversation, this ability to lean and leverage that collective wisdom of the people you've surrounded yourself with to help guide the business forward. So, Kevin, not bad, right?
Elliot, that was impressive.
5 minutes?
No,
5 minutes?
4:22.
Nice. That's very rare for me.
Well done, Elliot. Thank you. And I love this bag gripe ask. And I think that's, like you said, I mean, I think the important point about that is that that's not just for sales, but that like sets up for the conversation we need to have, talking about the successes, talking about the challenges, and then really spending a bulk of the time learning from our board and making sure we're engaging. Because too often I find board members sitting around in meetings not giving enough, and I love the idea of just like really engaging them and being on the forefront of that. So well done. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Pete, I will hand it back to you.
Kevin, thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who spoke today. A lot of really great content in there. A lot of that content that is going to be made available to everybody who is on this Zoom session. So I want to thank everyone for providing that. There are some awesome tools, some really great resources, just some great advice that's in there for you to take a look at, in more than 8-minute shots, right? And to have the opportunity to be able to use. Some of those tools are interactive. They're valuable pieces. I've checked them out. So keep an eye out for a link that'll be sent to everyone, along with some actually nice, I'll call them prizes. I have a 13-year-old and 11-year-old. They get goodie bags whenever they go to a big party or a big group event. And so we wanted to leave everybody with the same. So you're getting some really good stuff in there from sponsors and from the group. What we're going to do now is we are going to be shifting everybody into breakout groups. I think there are going to be about 6 groups. And that's going to be Lizzie, who's going to set that up. It's going to be coming here very, very soon and getting everybody posted up in rooms. So look for a prompt. You're then going to be ready to roll into a room, hit that, and then it's going to go from there. While you're in there, really think about, what are some of those topics that you want to be discussing with your board. Everybody here is here to help. We're all peers. We're all going to be going through something similar. So have at it. Thanks, everybody. I just want to close by thanking everyone. Thanks to all who stuck in and who actually helped to facilitate today's speakers, and then also in the breakout rooms. Thanks to everybody who attended. And look for the resources and links coming on the back end. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Right on.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Have a good one.